Our next session, ladies and gentlemen, is Building New and Sustainable Urban Centers in India. It definitely promises to be a very, very interesting session. And for this, we have with us an extremely eminent panel, and they will be joining us in another few seconds, and we will start with the session. For this session, we have with us Mr. Sanjeev Sanyal, Member Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister of India, Mr. Jagan Shah, CEO, InfraVision Foundation, Mr. Rajat Kumar Saini, CEO and MD, National Industrial Corridor Development Corporation, His Excellency Mr. La De Virta Kimo, Ambassador of Finland to India, and, of course, moderating the session is Mr. Chandrajit Banerjee. They will be joining us soon, and we will start with the session right away. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our panelists for this session. The session, Building New and Sustainable Urban Centers in India. The special address will be given by Mr. Sanjeev Sanyal, Member Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister of India. And to begin the session, I'd like to request Mr. Chandrajit Banerjee, Director General, Confederation of Indian Industry, to give the opening remarks and take the session forward.
Welcome back and good afternoon to the audience, and welcome to our phenomenal group of panelists that you see here. And we started yesterday. We are just 1.5 days old in this conference and another half day to go. We all know about how it started off with our finance minister opening the session. And from then on, in the many sessions that have followed, we've had many discussions which have touched upon, in many ways, the subject of this particular panel. Sustainability came into issues, urbanization and urban centers came in, So I think the topic that we have today of building urban and sustainable building new and sustainable urban centers in India becomes quite relevant, important, and relates to this, this conference, which is in its second edition. It's a great pleasure to welcome and have with us Mr. Sanjeev Sanyal, the member of the Economic Advisory Council to the Honorable Prime Minister of India. And all of us many of us, I would say, that have been seeing him reading much of his articles, seeing him speak on this particular subject and much beyond. And it will be great to have his thoughts and opening keynote by him for this session. Also with us is the Ambassador of Finland to India, Excellency Kimola de Berta. Excellency, thank you very much for being here with us. And it's a great example for us to know from him as to how Finland, which is a really a country which has done so well in this area of urbanization, smart urbanization, sustainable urbanization. I have also with me the CEO and Managing Director of the National Industrial Corridor Development Corporation. Now, everyone knows that how they are involved in those industrial cities. India, in its budget, as you know, we announced 12 industrial smart cities along the Golden Quadrilateral. And I'm sure today Mr. Saini is a very busy man, if I may say, with lots of challenges and lots of things to do to make these centers, these industrial centers, livable, these industrial centers attractable. And of course, Mr. Jagan Shah, who runs this think tank on Infra Foundation, which is again a think tank on infrastructure, a person who is himself considered very, very knowledgeable and experienced in the area of infrastructure. And Mr. Shah was instrumental in Indian Smart City Mission in his earlier capacity as the director of the India's National Institute of Urban Affairs. So a strong star-studded panel, which I would start off with Mr. Sanyal, but the format would be after Mr. Sanyal's speech, his keynote address, we'll have opening remarks by our panelists and a few questions, and the interested audience who puts up their request for a question would get the opportunity to converse with our esteemed panelists, and we'll wrap it up with some key takeaways and hard stop at 1:15. With that, may I invite our chief guest for this session and our keynote speaker, Mr. Sanjeev Sanyal, to set the ball rolling with his keynote speech, please. Yes, please. Yes, please.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you to CII for inviting me to speak here today. I'm going to speak about a topic, as you will see, I have fairly strong views. Some, like Jagan, knows what they are, but I'll give you a flavor of it. Now, of course, India is rapidly urbanizing. Development is about urbanizing, so it is not too surprising. But the issue that comes about is that how on earth do we go about creating cities that are sustainable, livable, and economically viable? Whether they are completely new cities or what will be, for the most part, old cities that need to be upgraded. Either which way, I'm going to talk about a few key principles that I think need to be talked about, because I think whenever we talk about cities and governance, it goes into a discussion about what kind of political structure should be so-and-so amendment or not amendment and so on. Frankly, no matter what structure of governance you set up for administratively, unless we as a people are clear about what are the principles of design that you need to use to build these sustainable, new, viable cities, we will not be able to build them unless we are absolutely clear what they are. So I'm going to lay out a few very key principles. I have only a few minutes. I have 10 minutes left now. So I'm going to be very quick about this. There are more to it, but some very key ones. First of all, when we are talking about sustainable cities and talking about lowering the impact of these urban centers on the environment in particular, and particularly we have to think about it, first of all, in per capita terms. We have to think about it per capita terms because we are a 1.45 billion people country. So, there will be some very large cities which on aggregate may have very high impact, but on per capita terms may be much lower. So we have to think about this in per capita terms. And when you do that, a very different image of what a sustainable city turns out. You see, the critical point about sustainable cities is density. There can be large dense cities, there can be small dense cities, but they need to be dense. Dense, I mean squeezing lots of people together in a small area. Unfortunately, the mental image of what is a great green city is the idea of spreading it out. Whenever we have a discussion about this, we tend to get into this conversation about, oh, we need to decongest, which is short form for going and occupying farmland, forest land, and other non-urban areas and capturing it into the urban space. This, in fact, is the source of much of our urbanism going wrong. When you spread out the city in the name of decongesting, that is actually unsustainable. And the result of it is that we have ended up with cities that are actually not dense enough. Even Mumbai, if you go to the top of a tall building, you will look around it, is actually largely empty. Large parts of Mumbai, for example, the entire eastern seaboard, which is the Port Trust land, there are large chunks of land internally with derelict factories and so on, which are actually empty. So, if you go to the top of a building, a tall building in Mumbai and look around you, it actually looks less dense like if you were doing it in Singapore. And yet, on the ground, the city feels more dense. Whereas in Singapore, it feels more green. This is actually an urban design problem. This is not a decongestion problem. Hong Kong and Singapore are far more densely packed than Mumbai is, and of course, Delhi is. So an important part is to build the infrastructure and design it for density. I'm making this point because in your heads, you will have the idea of Chandigarh being somehow more green than Mumbai. Actually, it's the other way around. Chandigarh occupies a huge amount of land to essentially house a very small number of people, keeping out the poor out of it, keeping out economic activity out of it, and essentially occupying large amounts of land. It is not even economically viable. If the chaps in Gurgaon weren't paying their taxes, Chandigarh wouldn't survive. It's a subsidy scheme for bureaucrats. It's not a city. So what we need, if you're talking about new cities, is not to ever recreate Chandigarh again. It's a bad idea. What you need to do is to build denser cities which pay taxes, monetize land, and do not occupy more farmland and forest land, etc. Densify them, use the land efficiently. Why is this also important? Because it's actually cheaper to run these denser cities as well. You need fewer kilometers of metro lines, you need fewer kilometers of wires, you need fewer kilometers of pipes. When you're going vertical, the pipes are visible, you don't need to dig up the roads. And so this entire design concept that we have in our heads of what a green city needs to be turned on its head. So this is one very important point I wanted to make. Secondly, we need to begin to think about what is viable for our Indian way of life in terms of aesthetics, in the way our society is set up. So, today, unfortunately, the most part, we tend to think of, for example, a gated community. Much of the literature will try and discourage you. I'm sorry, gated communities is the way we live. If you go to Ahmedabad and go and look at the poles, they are a gated community. The courtyard-based system, the Nukkad, is a gated community. That is the way we live our life. The Europeans may not live this way. The Americans may not live this way. We live this way. Because it creates spaces where a village, an urban village comes up. This is the space in which kids can be brought up and they can, many of us have grown up in areas when we, go out in the evening, maybe have dinner at a friend's house, come back from another place, play in that enclosed, safe space. That is how our community life happens. This is where we celebrate our Diwali, our Holi and festivals. This gated community is a way we set up things. So, a lot of Western literature somehow goes haywire about the idea of gated communities. I think that's the way our systems are set up. No, we should have no problem with it. It is not the gatedness of our residential areas, but the problem that we have of gating off our commercial areas. The commercial areas should in fact be open. So if you go to Nariman Point, most of the traffic jams are caused there by people going from one building to another. If you're familiar with Nariman Point in Mumbai, you'll see that Maker 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc., they're all built by the same builder, but they all have walls around themselves. And most of the people are actually going from one building to the next building. Same thing happens, by the way, in Bandra Kurla as well. Most of the traffic is going from one building to another building. But to go there, you have to come out to the main road, walk along, and then go to the next, even when you can see the building right there. Now you go to New York, they're all open. So our residential places, we are encouraged to open up, but our commercial spaces are all walled in. But commercial spaces is where actually you want this interaction. So we need to flip this the other way. We are wasting way too much real estate creating walls between our commercial spaces. Also walls within our, in the private realm, by creating this mid-20th century of having spaces which is within walls between the building and the road. All kinds of private spaces are stuck between these walls. Please get rid of them. Third, this is about aesthetics. Notice how when you go to any part of India and you go to a neighborhood or building that built before independence, it could be a colonial area, it could be a princely state or it could be something that's pre-colonial as well. But what will strike you is that every part of India has a certain architecture and aesthetics. And yet anything built after independence, we have got the same drab PWD box construction. Notice this? So, pre-independence, we have a diversity of interesting local architectures. Post-independence, we are united in the ugly architecture of RCC buildings. Why did we end up with this? Because our building codes do not allow us actually to build anything prettier. If we attempted to build the Taj Mahal today, we would not be able to because it would violate all our building codes. Unfortunately, in the name of standardization, we have incorporated into our entire thinking process a mid-20th century brutalist architecture that violates much of the way we live, violates our aesthetics. It makes no sense why today if you go, whether you go to Chennai and go to the so-called layouts, or you go to Delhi and look at the colonies, or you go to Kolkata and Salt Lake, we have the same box-like cement architecture, which is derived from an alien idea. By the way, much of these problems that I am all talking about derive from a gentleman who is considered a fascist in the rest of the world, but is esteemed as a great architect and urban designer in India, Le Corbusier. And where does these Corbusierian ideas and design ideas come from? It comes from the wrong mathematics. So before I end, I'll tell you What is the source of all this problem? It comes from the fact that we apply the wrong maths to our urban design. We apply Euclid and straight lines and curved lines which are Euclidean. It leads to a certain kind of Cartesian geometry, which is not the way we live our lives. The mathematics of traditional Indian architecture, of traditional Indian urban design, is actually comes from fractals. Fractal mathematics, please study it, and complexity theory. This is the mathematics of nature. This is the mathematics of your nervous system. This is the mathematics of your circulatory system. This is the mathematics of a tree. This is basically self-replicating the same design at various scales. Okay, let me describe it to you. What is the aesthetic? Why do we find, for example, the ghats of Varanasi to be beautiful? Because there is no symmetry in it. So why does it look beautiful to us? Why does you go to Palitana and look all the spires of those Jain temples? Why does it look beautiful? Because it is the replication of the same motif over and over again in different scales. So in Varanasi, for example, those steeples, they are replicated over and over again. The ghats, the steps are replicated over and over again. And that leads to a certain aesthetic. That is the source of Indian aesthetics. You look at a Hindu temple, it has the steeple, there are smaller steeples, even smaller steeples. In fact, you may have it, even in the same steeple, they will have certain sub-steeples. These are essentially the logic of fractal mathematics. And now, let us look at how this would get applied into the way we think of cities. These are cellular structures and different scales. It will lead you, interestingly, to replicate Varanasi. Varanasi's roads are basically main road, short, smaller lanes, ever smaller lanes, mohallas, nukkars, houses with courtyards, right? Now, notice that the problem with Varanasi is not that it is a bad design. Varanasi, in fact, is just as old as the Harappan cities. Now, most archaeologists now beginning to see that Varanasi is one of the oldest cities in the world. It's at least been around for 4,000, if not 5,000 years. So it was contemporary to the late period Harappa. And yet those straight lines of Harappa did not keep Harappa and those Harappan cities alive. And yet those squiggly lanes of Varanasi are still around, suggesting something must be superior about the design of Varanasi. Because it is based on fractal mathematics, which is the way we live. The real problem with Varanasi is not that its lanes are all crooked and going all over the place. The real problem is we are trying to drive cars on them. Remove the cars, improve the management and cleaning of those lanes. That design is actually superior. If you're trying to walk, Varanasi is far superior to Delhi. If you want public spaces like ghats, it's far superior to Delhi, today's Delhi. So what you really need is to clean up the place. Do not confuse a management problem with a design problem. So let me end this conversation by saying we need to relook urban design from an Indian perspective. We need to look for density. We need to create spaces which are fit our aesthetics, fit our way of living. So this requires us to rethink our architecture and town planning from bottom up, recreating what we are learning from, unfortunately taught in almost all our architecture and town planning schools. I'm sorry, what is taught there is actually damaging the way our cities are built. We all experience it, but let me tell you, this is the source of it. We are simply building the wrong kind of cities. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
So what happened in the last 10 minutes was nothing much unusual. So when we were walking in, I was expecting him to stir the pot, and you have. And you have done that extremely well. And so I wonder whether the panelists, the three that follow, are changing their talking points or tweaking it to follow the rest of the session. But great concepts, great thoughts, great challenges. Thank you for really doing that, Mr. Sanyal. Appreciate. And I do not want to sort of give bullet summaries of what he said, because that's, I'm sure, pretty much in our minds. But I'd like to move on to the Ambassador of Finland, Excellency. Again, not sure if you are going to change the written document that you have in your hand in any way as you speak along. Over to you.
Thank you so much, and really it was, I think, very good opening for this discussion, certainly thought-provoking, and like you said, stirring the pot. But my approach is a little bit different. I just want to bring, let's say, some perspectives from Finland to this discussion. And really, I think to start with, urbanization is reshaping the way we live and work, but it also brings immense challenges. It is necessary, but we need to handle the questions related to energy, water, environment, infrastructure, and so on better than we have been doing so far. And perhaps I could highlight some areas where I believe Finland and India can enhance our cooperation to make urban centers more sustainable, more resilient, and more resource efficient. And I would say that perhaps the first thing is in my mind, a systems approach to sustainability. Urban planning in this century demands a systems approach that integrates energy, water, waste, mobility, and so forth. Treating these elements in isolation is no longer viable. Finland's experience demonstrates that bringing these together creates cities that are not only efficient, but are also more livable and sustainable. I think India's rapid urbanization is a unique opportunity to implement such integrated models, both from planning new urban centers to retrofitting existing ones. I think this holistic approach can reduce resource consumption, lower carbon emissions, and ensure long-term resilience. Second, I think water management is a foundational pillar in many ways, because water, of course, is essential for life and economic activity. Yet India is facing one of its worst water crises, with millions of people experiencing severe water stress. So these challenges must be addressed. And I think some of the key priorities from our point of view is, first of all, an energy-efficient wastewater treatment. Because nowadays, wastewater treatment facilities can be transformed from energy consumers to energy producers, for example. Also, wastewater recycling is something that addresses both water shortages, reduces pollution, and saves energy. Finnish companies do have significant know-how also in this area. I think a third area then is sustainable construction and infrastructure, where low carbon construction is going to be very important. For example, we have companies like Betolar, for example, who is pioneering technologies to replace traditional cement, because the raw materials for cement are running out. Also, the use of construction and demolition waste to create sustainable building materials is important, like is also developing concrete building, or let's say factories to produce concrete building elements, which really can improve efficiency, lower costs, and decrease carbon emissions significantly. Also, there are interesting models for example, factory as a service concept, where green factories are leased and later repurposed for other things. Fourth, I would mention energy and waste integration, because urban centers are not only major consumers of energy and waste producers, but these or integrating these solutions is really vital for sustainability. We need smart energy solutions, yeah, obviously. We also need biomass and biofuels and waste management, treating both solid waste and also, let's say, waste in rivers and seas. Plastic waste is a key problem here that needs to be solved, for example. Then, fifth area that I would like to take up here is connectivity and mobility. Finland is often referred to as land of innovation, and we have consistently been at the forefront of groundbreaking technologies. Our journey, for example, in telecommunications is a prime example. I do believe that AI-powered 5G networks and in future 6G networks are enabling cities to become more efficient and sustainable. So from intelligent traffic management to energy optimization, smart metering and sensoring and so on are technologies for creating urban environments that respond dynamically to the needs of their citizens. We have a company called Nokia, for example, which is a global frontrunner in developing both advanced radio networks and optical networks, which really form the backbone of modern data transfer. And 5G nowadays already is not just another step in connectivity, but is really the foundation of a fully interconnected world, enabling real-time communication, data sharing, and new generation of applications across industries. And when combined with smart technologies for real-time metering of electricity and water, for example, and atmospheric conditions, as well as, for example, charting the condition of roads real-time, are some of the examples of technologies that offer astounding prospects, I would say. But obviously, as everything becomes connected, cybersecurity and other means to ensure the resilience of cities becomes crucial. In Finland, we have had a systematic approach to these questions for decades already, to resilience and so on. But they continue to be a challenge also for us. So I think sharing of best practices and know-how between like-minded societies is a key to tackling these challenges. But urban mobility is another dimension here, and I think this EV charging infrastructure, smart ports and vessel traffic management, and even floating infrastructure are some of the issues that will be important. But overall, to conclude with, I really do believe that India and Finland do share a commitment to sustainability, innovation, and inclusive growth. We are already partners in digitalization, education, sustainability, and innovation, or DESI, as we call our approach. And our partnership holds, I think, tremendous potential also to address the challenges of urbanization. So by combining Finland's expertise and technology and innovation with India's skills, ambition, and scale, we can co-create solutions that not only serve our two countries, but also can set global benchmarks for sustainable urban development. So I think it's key is to work together to ensure that the urban centers that we build today become the thriving, inclusive, and sustainable communities of tomorrow. And Finland and Finnish companies are certainly ready to partner with Indian counterparts on this transformative journey. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Excellency. Thank you very much, Ambassador. I'm sure there would be a lot of Finland's inputs which would be required as we go along in developing our smart cities and our smart and especially in the industrial corridors. And that brings me to Mr. Rajat Kumar Saini, the person who is at this point in time pretty challenged as he develops these industrial cities. And we heard our keynote speaker talking about clusters and how and he is supposed to bring these clusters which would be sustainable, and he would also have to build these clusters in a manner which is where he will also need to find talent, where he would need to bring in social infrastructure and in areas which are going to be newly tread, unlike what Chandigarh was. So what have you got to say?
Thank you, Mr. Banerjee. And unlike Excellency over here, I had to change my notes after the stirring and revolutionary speech, the ideas that were there. So I would just first like to briefly tell what we do. So we are named National Industrial Corridor Development Corporation. Many of you might have heard about Delhi-Mumbai Industrial Corridor or Amritsar-Kolkata. There are many more. There are now 11 industrial corridors across India. And these corridors cover approximately 90% of the manufacturing that is happening in India. More than 80% of industrial parks in India are along these corridors, and most of the industrial land and where the industries are being set up is along these corridors. That can be taken as a positive thing or a negative thing, but that is the fact over here. We do a lot of planning for these corridors, as in what should be the infrastructure like, and by corridor, I mean not just those roads going from Delhi to Mumbai or Chennai to Bengaluru, but around 100-kilometer area on either side. So we do a lot of planning in terms of what should be the connectivity links, road, rail, power, ports, multimodal logistic hubs, etc., etc. And then the states and infrastructure ministries, they include all those things in their plans, and kind of a enabling ecosystem. So there is an existing ecosystem which is stronger than rest of the country, and then we strengthen it more. What we eventually end up doing ourselves, apart from making plans, is building these industrial smart cities that Mr. Banerjee was mentioning. There were 8 industrial smart cities earlier. Some of you might have heard about Dholera in Gujarat or Shendra Bitkin in Maharashtra, some part of Greater Noida in Uttar Pradesh. And going by or encouraged by the results that were achieved in last 10 years, government has approved very recently in the month of August, 12 more industrial smart cities. And when I'm saying industrial smart cities, these are basically greenfield industrial smart cities. So I sometimes say that it's the audacity of vision that is over here, in the sense that if I talk about Dholera, the master planning is around 500 square kilometer. So we have started with 30-40 square kilometer development as of now. That is where India's first semiconductor fab by Tata's is coming up. So the audacity of vision is there. And this is also some kind of lab for what smart cities can be like. When we are developing these smart cities, those are not riddled with the issues that are found in many of the legacy cities, many of the existing cities. So it is our job to ensure that all the ideas about planning, and I never use the word design, but the keynote speech, that there are urban designing issues. Generally, the word that is used is planning, and obviously designing needs to be considered, as well as what industry wants. So all the sectors cannot come in all the places. So there is a kind of study, a kind of nudge towards a particular sector to come up in particular areas, and that is dependent upon its location, that is dependent upon the skill set available, that is dependent upon the raw material, that is dependent upon the demand and anchor industry, etc., etc. So this is how we go about identifying the locations and planning about it. And then we construct these cities in a fairly conventional manner, as in construction of trunk infrastructure in terms of roads, power, water utilities, CTP, WTP, integrated command control center, etc., etc. And the industries are coming up. Now, coming to the issues that we face, which a legacy city might not face, is the social infrastructure. Most of the legacy cities, they have some kind of growth center and social infrastructure over the years has developed. What we found when the trunk infrastructure was developed, when the industry was interested, the problem for the labor, the lower management, the senior management or the middle management was the unavailability of social infrastructure. This was something that in our initial cities we had not taken into account that there would be a problem related to social infrastructure. I think the prevalent idea was that you build a city, you build infra, industry would come, and just because of the lure of job, etc., people would move in, and alongside social infrastructure will also come. But it didn't happen so easily, and not just it didn't happen, it is not happening so easily. And the industries sometime over there face problems. We have to find ingenious solutions about how to, so whether we should nudge industry to build housing and other social infrastructure, whether the government should pitch in for some of the social infrastructure. All these questions we need to grapple with. The ideas about sustainability of cities or the kind of infra should be there, or whatever the kind of, ideally a city, what should it look like as far as the master planning is concerned, all those ideas are there. But these were some of the unanticipated issues that we are facing, and trying to solve it in our own way by getting stakeholders on board, by identifying the issues and all. And one more thing that we, or not just us, but which is being said, that cities as growth hubs, what Dr. Sanyal also mentioned, that if development is supposed to happen, it is supposed to happen through urban areas, and our cities need to be the growth centers, and not just growth centers in terms of economy, they have to create a significant number of jobs also. So if we are going to achieve that vision of $30 to $35 trillion of economy, and with manufacturing being 25% of it, then there needs to be that much manufacturing infrastructure, and it will lead to manufacturing, the jobs in manufacturing. So that is also something that we are trying to tackle with, that giving the infrastructure through which manufacturing can come. And not just the announcement related to 12 industrial smart cities, but many of you might have heard about the announcement about 100 new industrial parks or industrial areas by better use of town planning schemes. So the idea was that we need to make cities as growth hub as well as hubs for jobs in manufacturing. That is why these industrial parks near cities need to come, and land acquisition becomes an issue, so there needs to be a better use of town planning schemes. So all these ideas are being discussed, the schemes are being rolled out, the projects are being rolled out with specific targets, with specific aims, that this is the problem that we are trying to tackle. Industrial Corridor Program itself is trying to develop the whole ecosystem for manufacturing, and as well as the industrial smart cities. But there are problems that which we did not anticipate and are trying to solve, and those problems are especially related to social infrastructure once we have created the hard infrastructure. The positive thing that we have realized after the completion or in this process is there is no dearth of demand, as in there is no dearth of investments coming to these cities. So whatever we have created, it is being lapped up. There is investment, domestic investors as well as foreign investors who are interested in coming and investing in these cities. And if these problems, so this is, I think, one major force that is driving us forward, that all the issues can be solved, should be solved, but the main thing for the demand of this industrial infrastructure that is there, because of this particular driving force, I think we would be able to solve all the problems that are coming on our way. So I would stop here and request Mr. Banerjee.
Thank you very much. Thank you for those issues which you have brought out very critically. And also, I would see that these cities, these smart cities, these new townships being connected, as you talked about manufacturing, I would also imagine there are challenges and there are solutions of connecting them to the ports so that we are able to boost our exports, etc., logistics costs, all of that into account. And also, while you were speaking, and I was thinking of what Mr. Sanyal had mentioned, was pondering on the point on, we are also going to attract a lot of expats living in some of these places and in the newer cities that comes in. And how does that come into, how do we get that, our traditional way of living, our traditional architecture, and also keeping these people also pretty much engaged with in these cities or attracted to these cities. Now I turn to the expert, so to say, Jagan, always, with all of this that have come up, many points, many areas. Digitization would take up a huge role in much of the solution. I also see the big data analytics, technology, all of that. And so for all those solutions, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Banerjee. I think one of the most heartening things about this panel is the fact that 10 years after the Smart Cities mission was launched, we no longer necessarily have to inform anybody about what smart solutions look like or feel like. And as the ambassador himself mentioned, a country like Finland can actually see a market in India for the kinds of technologies and solutions that are on offer. If anybody, and I'm sure quite a few of the people in the audience were around 10 years ago, they might recall when CII planned in December 2013 the first Smart City Conclave, which I had the good fortune of actually being part of. We were exploring new territory. We were talking about what looked like, the future, and yet now the future has, in a sense, arrived, and we don't have to necessarily sell those technologies. So the market-forming impact of a policy like Smart Cities in India, that is clearly apparent now, and in a sense, we've been successful in that. It's an intangible success. I think with regard to the patterns of urbanization and the new initiatives like industrial corridors, I'd like to just reflect a little bit on that. I couldn't agree with Sanjeev more that the fractal logic of a city like Banaras is something that we need to understand better. Perhaps we also have to figure out how do you engineer such a city. But at the same time, we must also keep in mind that perhaps this is not an either-or situation. It's not choosing between one or the other, but India is vast enough to accommodate all kinds of solutions. And in particular, I want to mention the sort of the contrasting solutions, such as a kind of reticular kind of development that Sanjeev was describing, is something that comes about because of the accretion of history. Cities evolve over history, and a lot of that is a kind of accretive process. But when you're planning out perhaps for something like industrial corridors, new cities, maybe we should look back at the way that the West was occupied in the United States, in Northern America, where, for instance, Thomas Jefferson actually had a plan where what he called the democratic grid, which is the grid that you see in all American cities, that grid was laid over the entire territory of the United States, or what was not yet completely the United States of America. And that grid gave you a logic, it gave you a certain efficiency in the city layout, which today we should certainly study with great seriousness, because there is an efficiency in the grid which goes back not only to Mohenjo-daro, but to Roman cities, and lies at the base of a lot of our thinking about new cities. We should think about that, and I would recommend to Mr. Saini that definitely consider not a picturesque layout of streets and so on, but a very efficient grid as being, in a sense, your standard response to the layout. We are in a bit of a conundrum also from the economic perspective. The brownfield cities, which are messy, polluted, crowded, congested, are also the centers of the service economy that is playing a very significant role in the growth of our economy. And therefore, you're also finding that the indigenous growth in those cities is actually overtaking the migration. So interestingly, we have this kind of conundrum where you want to build on the captive capacity you have in your brownfield locations and attract migration to the greenfield locations. And you actually have to do both of these at the same time. Build on the capacity of existing cities, which are not necessarily manufacturing centers anymore. In almost most cases, none of the big cities are manufacturing centers. But they're centers of service economy, the financial economy, and financial industry, and so on. And you need to, at the same time, expand so that you accommodate new industries and new economic activities. So you need to take a geographical and a regional perspective on all of this. Cities, at best, are part of a much larger economic geography. And therefore, I think the corridor development is something that holds a lot of potential. But if we get it right, if we land up with the kinds of unplanned, haphazard, peri-urban growth around these industrial cities, such as something you even see outside Nimrana today, if you see, the informal city in Nimrana has created a huge pressure on the planned smart city of Nimrana. We have to plan for a much larger spatial expanse and make sure that what has happened to Delhi shouldn't happen there, where something like 360 plus urban villages in Delhi are completely beyond the scope of the so-called planned city of Delhi. I would almost say that Delhi is more unplanned than planned. And it's a result of not having anticipated the problems created by absorbing villages into your urban areas. And that's what we're seeing in peri-urban areas. And there is not only a kind of rent seeking that is happening from the planned city, but it imposes a huge burden, whether it is the burden of distance and commuting, but also environmental impacts of not having proper planned infrastructure. So we must keep all of this in mind as we think of industrial and economic and urban regions, rather than of cities alone, because cities are only building blocks, really, for larger economic regions. I would say that there are ideas already successfully applied in a country like ours, joint stock companies like in Magarpatta in Maharashtra that created a very well-managed, efficient city, privately managed, privately created through a joint stock company of farmers. Now, I don't see why we are not exploring more such scenarios where farmers become part not only of land acquisition, but they contribute land, as they have done, for instance, in Amravati, in Andhra Pradesh. They contribute land, but become shareholders, so to speak, in the success of the city. This urban-rural tension, which has not fully been covered by policy, I think it's high time India fixes this. We look at the necessary policy interventions there. And my last point would be that all of this needs finance. And it is a pity that we don't, a country of our size and ambition, with the kind of urban network that we have, we still don't have dedicated urban financing, sort of sovereign funds, for instance. Why does NABFID only look at infrastructure development, but not look at urban as maybe a pillar within its financing strategy? Why don't we create a new sovereign fund for city development? Because that takes the load off already stressed municipalities, already stressed state government budgets as well. The Finance Commission can at best give us basic grants so that our water, sanitation, and basic functions can continue. But we need the infusion of capital, and I think you need to create the confidence that comes from a sovereign fund. Having skin in the game, if you want to attract the quantum of investment we will need for all of these cities and urban regions to become successful economic powerhouses, as have regions like Shenzhen become, and throughout the last 200 years, whether it's Europe or America or Africa, you will see that it's really economic regions that have captured the imagination of those economies and have delivered maximum results. I'll pause there. Thanks.
Thank you very much. when you have a very strong star-studded panel, we have always a challenge of time, but I think many of the questions that we had in mind have been pretty well addressed in many formats. We have 15 minutes left, as I mentioned. Some thoughts which have come from, which I would like to pose a couple of questions or 2-3 questions, and I'll not pose it to anyone in particular, but it would be nice if one of our esteemed panelists pick up any one of them, and I'll bring in 2 or 3 people from the audience with the time that we have, and then turn to our audience. One of the thoughts that which came from Mr. Sanyal's remarks and what the others said later was, all of this would require a change in mindset of those people, of the people who are on the ground, the people who are going to be in the city. I don't know whether you would like them to be called bureaucrats, but how do we get? I mean, I heard you speak about urban local bodies and the changes in structures can follow and the importance of it. But how do we do that? Because there is going to be much need for that. Second, I also, when I was listening to you, yes, we are the gated type, but if you really look at a city like a Gurgaon, it's difficult to even for the gated community now to walk outside the gate. And this requires, again, governance mindset of those to clean it up. Even the garbage would not get picked. We have to live in modern times, and the number of expats coming in and staying in these cities and the mix of culture, which is a phenomenal thing. But then I really liked your point on culture on our own culture, and which has so much to work on. And my last point was on last mile. Today, as we move along with every strata of the society, a person who lands up in metro would come to work in another person's house in the absence of a last mile connectivity, would use an auto which is emitting whatever it is. So these were my thoughts. There are challenges on water, etc. But I'll start with you, Mr. Sanyal, and then I'll bring in a couple of people from the audience and turn to the other panelists. Thank you.
So let me say that Indian town planning fails for exactly the same reason that economic planning used to fail. It is basically a top-down view of some wise men sitting somewhere who can draw some straight lines and curved lines on some board and think that that is actually what urban planning is. That's why I prefer to use the idea of urban design, because there is a more evolved idea of what these social clusters will be and so on. So I'm trying to get people to get away from this idea that cities are machines for living, which is the Corbusierian idea, to think of it as an organic thing that evolves, things happen. And then what will happen is we'll stop having these conversations about, today the success of urban planner is, oh, you only planned 50 square kilometers, I did 500 square kilometers. This is a ridiculous way of thinking about it. Whole point about urbanism is concentration, right? That's why they are important. All great cities are concentrated. It's the economic and social power energies that get triggered by concentration that lead to cities. So why are we trying to spread these things out? So I'll give you one example. Whenever we want to build an IIT, the IITs have a debate of whether they should have 200 acres or 400 acres or 500 acres. This is a ridiculous way of thinking. Success of an IIT should be how little land it required, because that is what concentrates it. Go and look at MIT. It's built in the middle of a city, right? New York, or some of the best universities in the world are basically cities. Oxford is basically a city which has colleges scattered around it. This is a completely different way of thinking about the city. Whereas here, what we are trying to do is we have got this reductionist idea of an industrial thing that we have to plan top down. Whereas what I'm arguing for is a much more organic thing, which is made up maybe of these gated pieces, but in general is a much more evolving thing. Now, this is why my argument is the future is about managing Gurgaon better, not building more Chandigarhs. But in the end, I ask the best way to judge whether the truth of my statement is if two kids grew up, one in Chandigarh and one in Gurgaon, and they reached the age of 22 and just finished their undergrad degree, is the person likely to move, is the Gurgaon one likelier to move to Chandigarh or the Chandigarh to Gurgaon? Almost 90% of the case, the Chandigarh one will move to Gurgaon because that's where the jobs are, that's where their friends are, that's where the better bars are. Right. So therefore, why are we attempting to build these so-called industrial cities? So if you want to succeed with these industrial corridors, then it's not about trying to build ever more Chandigarhs in a larger scale. It's about trying to find bits and pieces where you can have these concentrated Gurgaons and manage them proper. So the point is never confuse a management problem for a design problem. The problem of Varanasi is a management problem, it's not a design problem. After all, we all go to Europe and wander around the cobble streets of medieval cities. They're perfectly nice to live in. London is a medieval city with all kinds of lanes going everywhere. No problem. It's actually quite interesting. So there is no actual problem with the messiness of that. Those grids are not the point. Manhattan succeeds with that grid basically because at a meta level it's extremely messy because it allows office blocks to be right next to residential blocks, right next to something. And there are all kinds of sizes of buildings. It allows for a certain level of messiness. If you don't allow for a certain level of messiness, what do you end up with? You end up with Dwarka area of Delhi. It's a Soviet-looking thing. It's brand new, by the way, but it's utterly unlivable Soviet construction, which is both aesthetically ugly and essentially maybe a grid, but essentially dysfunctional. So the point I'm making is that we need to figure out ways of creating more organic cities. You can plan for them, by the way. Singapore is a great example of planning for an organic outcome. And I myself was involved in a lot of that thinking, so I'm quite aware of how much thought went into it. But when you go into the middle of Singapore, for example, in and around that, where they have the Bay Area, look at how messy they have made it deliberately. They've got these the Sands hotel complex with a casino. Across from it is Esplanade. There is the CBD area, that's the Central Business District. In the middle of all of that, they have deliberately added in residential stuff and made it messy, deliberately. It's planned to be messy. And yet it's beautiful because you build the infrastructure for it. Instead, what we get in India is some attempt at creating a Cartesian grid. Singapore's modern, probably the most super modern place in the world, did not fit into your Cartesian grid. So it is not about the Cartesian grid. It is about creating a vibrant urban space. Sometimes a Cartesian grid may work, sometimes it doesn't. But in fact, what you really need to care about is about the fluidity of the landscape as it exists. One of the major problems with these Cartesian grids is that we don't take into account the water drainage systems, which are not Cartesian, but in fact fractal. So therefore, you will end up, there's no need to worry about the straightness of the road as much as whether or not it leads to concentration and interesting spaces, which are sometimes idiosyncratic. So I hope 12-minute lecture is not good enough to explain what I'm trying to say. I would like to have some photographs to express what I'm trying to say, but I hope I'm quite clear.
Very much. I think when Jagan helps us plan the next session on urban city, the urbanization from 2013, our focus would perhaps will dedicate the entire session on this particular aspect, and especially about how we can really look at what Sanjeev Sanyal just mentioned and deliberate further on it. It requires a lot more deliberation and come out with solutions. But thanks for opening up that box for discussions as we go along. I'll open it up to a few people for questions, some questions which I posed, which the others could ask as we go along. Nikhil, who has been involved, and water is a big issue. I like Nikhil, if you can pose a very short question. We'll have to have a hard stop. So Nikhil, would you start off with your question, please?
Thank you, CB. Firstly, right here. Wonderful session, and I truly applaud Mr. Sanyal's view on distinguishing between management and design. But the issue when it comes to water, and I think it was something that Jagan brought up as well, is that we are not planning adequately with the money that we spend and planning for the future. You brought up stormwater drainage in a sense in terms of one of the issues with water. I feel that there isn't enough appreciation for what is required for future planning. The timelines that we are using for planning is not adequate. I would appreciate your views as to how you view the timelines and funding in urban design while keeping in view your points about distinguishing between management and design.
Thanks. Ashima Goel, just a quick one, please.
Thank you. So excellent session. I would like to add some disruption to the disruption. Is it true that concentration is the future of our cities? Because with digital technology and the internet, a lot of people want to work from home, they want to work from green surroundings, so they migrate out and they connect into cities. That is one. And the second is, do these smart cities drop from the sky? Because we have so many census towns in India. Now, if you travel in Kerala, the entire area looks like a city. It's entirely built up. Census towns which are not designated as towns because they would lose the money that comes for agricultural development. And they don't want to spend money on providing municipal services. So shouldn't those also, I mean, can those grow organically into the concentrations of tomorrow? Yeah.
Siddhant, you wanted to ask?
Sure. I think it's very nice to hear this. There was recently an example, Athens is reusing its old Roman-era viaducts to pipe in water. So instead of planning all these new cities, every district has a headquarter. There are small urban centers already existing. Can we find ways to incorporate them? There is already some basic social infrastructure. So there may be a solution in reusing and organically allowing these old existing centers to grow.
Last, Ashank, a short 30 seconds question.
Okay. Thanks. It was an eye-opener, Mr. Sanyal. My quick point is, you well explained the space size can be inefficient. But too dense also has its own problems and inefficiencies. We need not discuss it all here. We all know Mumbai is housing in 400 square kilometers, 13 million people. So I think there is an optimum there somewhere. Not too dense, not too space. And somebody has to find out what is that density. And I don't think there is a clarity in the planners of cities. Today we spend a lot of time in increasing FSIs, as we call it in Mumbai, floor sense index. So I think at a national level, we need a study as to what is an optimum density. That's all I'm saying.
Thanks, Mr. Sanel.
So first of all, there's no such thing as an optimal density. It depends what you're trying to build. So obviously, a financial hub will have much higher optimal density, or if there is such a thing as an optimal at all. And it will vary in different parts of the city. So first of all, I don't think we should work towards defining an optimal density, because immediately it will be put into our building codes and somebody will try to make money from it. So my own view is this is fluid. It has to be allowed to generate, evolve over time. Mumbai today, and after the new infrastructure that we have just put in with the new metro line, the thing, will be able to put up, would be able to keep a lot more people comfortably living than would have been the case before this infrastructure was built. So we should allow for wherever possible FSIs to be allowed to go up. The point is, how much infrastructure are you building and what is its capacity to deal with the increase in concentration you're creating? And can you then create enough open spaces, etc., that human beings need for having whatever, connect with the ground? So my own view is that there is no, Indian cities, as I pointed out to you, are not concentrated enough in many cases, including Mumbai. Okay? And in fact, just to go to a point about brownfield cities, much of our cities will be brownfield. And in fact, there, let me say, that there is massive scope for expanding our brownfield cities internally and concentrating them more. Every single major Indian city has large amounts of derelict land that should be redeployed, and I'll give you some examples of it. Kolkata's entire riverfront is essentially derelict warehouses, much of it owned, by the way, by the Kolkata Port Trust. Mumbai's entire eastern seaboard is the Mumbai Port Trust. We should redeploy this. The center of Kanpur happens to be the Lal Imli, and where hundreds of acres of old derelict mills. It should be redeployed. Redeployment of buildings is important. Redeployment of land is important, but redeployment even of old buildings is important. And whenever we do it, unfortunately in India we have, some bizarre sentimental attachment even to some old use, just because it is the old use. Oh my God, this was a mill, now we will turn it into a mall. Even if it creates more jobs, it's somehow back of our head, it's somehow a bad thing. We are having this right now in Delhi. Everybody got very agitated when we came up with this idea that North Block and South Block should be converted into the National Museum. But hello, you all go to the Louvre. The Louvre was originally a palace, then it became the finance ministry, now it is a museum. Nobody has a problem with that. But somehow the fact that a city is an organic place where, places like Shastri Bhavan deserve to be torn down. It's a good thing. So they are evolving things. Yes, you need to preserve some parts of it which are, valuable to keep. The rest of it needs to evolve. New infrastructure needs to be brought in. And yes, we need to concentrate it. And if you build the infrastructure for it, no concentration is high enough. And yes, if there are people who want to work very far away from the city, welcome to do so. Please do so. The city is not meant for you then, if you are able to work from somewhere far away. There are activities and people who prefer to live in these densities, so let those people live in them. If you think you can work from sitting on the beach in some village in Goa, great. But then the city is not what we are building for.
Fantastic conclusion. I'll ask the others to also, if Ambassador has found some new opportunities of business of Finland in India.
Well, not perhaps new, but I think this whole approach to sustainability with making sure that we start to use materials that will last a bit longer than, for example, the raw materials of cement is going to be crucial. We also need to make sure that the materials and resources that we used are charged to the cost that they actually have. So water, electricity, all the other materials must have realistic cost to reduce wastage. It's another question that then society must have means to help the poor people who maybe can't afford the costs. That's another thing. But to avoid wastage, we have to devise systems how we can deal with these costs. And I think in the future we will have to do it in real time. For example, for electricity and water. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Rajaji, any thoughts that you want to respond to the questions raised, or any thoughts that you are taking away from here?
Well, we have crossed the hard stop of 1:15, but definitely some ideas about urban design and whether we need to have new greenfield cities. Maybe for a service-oriented city, for residential and all, yes, the organic city can develop and cater to its demands. Sometimes the kind of manufacturing that we want to come to India and do that, there is demand for greenfield industrial spaces, and that is what we are trying to create. And definitely the overall ecosystem around the cities needs to be much better, needs to be improved. And my takeaway is that, if I can say for myself, is about the organic development and how can planning be brought to that organic development. Yeah.
Thank you. Because we have crossed the hard stop, and the panelists have been very gracious to listen to the questions. I'll give up the wrap-up time and a quick sum up to my good friend Jagan.
Thank you. I'm not sure I can sum up the entire richness of the conversation, but maybe just a few points in response to some of the questions. I think that, you know, and we work on infrastructure at the InfraVision Foundation, and one of the key sort of realities of infrastructure is age and obsolescence. And so the conundrum always is, do you build everything and wait for population that comes and uses the infrastructure? Do you build in a sort of incremental way? And that requires systems thinking, which is not very easy to manage because you need to control the conditions around this. So it will remain a big question actually with regard to water supply, sanitation, and other kinds of core infrastructure. You know, how much do we build? Can we finance all of it at one go, and so on? I think to Dr. Ashima Krishna's question on census towns, I would, much as I like the idea that concentration and dispersal will both operate, of course, but it depends on the distances between the dispersed parts. You know, so we have, for instance, the National Capital Region plan talks about polynucleated development, sort of, you know, so that's a kind of dispersal as well. But if it is peri-urban, then it actually impinges on the existing city and actually imposes a lot of burden on the city, because the jobs are still in the primate city and everybody from the peri-urban is actually commuting into CBDs and such like. So again, that's a systems view that we need to form and really take a call on that. And I'd like to just close with flagging, you know, the terrible lack of capacity in our urban local bodies. You raised that point, and I think it needs to have a much larger national debate, because far from having a planner or an urban designer, Sanjeev, you know, municipalities don't even have enough engineers or accountants to manage their affairs. So we have a severe problem with regard to capacities in municipal bodies. And we have to find a way to fix this problem. We have 1/20th the amount of capacity on ground as an average American city might have of comparable size. And we simply can't manage our cities in that way. And we don't have important skills like planning and design and so on, which are necessary now to look at the future of cities. So I'll close with that somewhat sobering thought, that we don't have the sufficient capacity. But I must say, you know, the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs is once again trying to build a strategy on capacity. I'm part of a working group that's looking at the issue, and now to look at digital, you know, delivery of knowledge and skilling through digital platforms, perhaps, might be the way to go. But we have to fix this problem. Thanks.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, Mr. Sanyal. Thank you, Mr. Shah, and thank you, Mr. Saini, for a phenomenal session, and thank you for the audience. We have a lot of thought to take forward in our future discourses on cities. Thank you.
Yes, a loud round of applause, please, for all our panelists. CB, may I request you to hand over a token of appreciation to each one of them, please? Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll break for lunch now. Lunch is at the same place it was yesterday, at the Rajabagh, and we look forward to having you reconvene here at 2 o'clock.